Welcome back to another session. I hope you were well. Today I would be speaking to the topic why her past matters. Why her past matters. Um, think about this analogy. Again, I'm going to use cars. If you were going to buy a car, one of the things that I would hope that you would do will be to check the past history. You search the available databases and all the available online mediums to gather and to gather as much information as you can about the car. A car being sold, irrespective of age, make or model, needs to have a substantial amount or a significant amount or the necessary amount of information about its past. One of the ways we document such information is by categorizing information into different sections or areas. One might be the general use of the car, and one might also be the functional position, status of the car itself. We in the UK will do things such as an MOT, service history. We would also go as far as doing things such as both preventative and necessary maintenance, and keeping a schedule, a documentation of all of the things that have been done to make sure the car did not break down or to repair the car after it broke down. There are other websites that document things such as whether the car has been in an accident, whether it's gone through the general processes of whether it's been involved in any form of theft, some form of, you might say, claim, some form of fraud. In other words, there's the financial being pulled together, there's the performance based on age and use being pulled together, and then there is the general description. We go through the process of ensuring that we gather as much information as we can, and we want to look at that information to enable us make a sound decision. It's a logical decision. We want the best return on our investments, both in time and resources. But also we want to ensure that whilst we are getting a good return from a cash perspective or from a resource perspective, that we are not putting ourselves in harm's way. For example, a car that has been involved in either a substantial, significant accident, that is given a designation of a category, in this particular instance, let's say it's a structural issue. It's had an accident and there were structural issues of category S or whatever nomenclature that is used. We would want to know because we want to understand how impactful that damage was. For example, if the damage had rendered the airbags obsolete, or if the airbags were changed from its original factory setting, that is of concern because the concern we might have is in the event of a collision. Again, will the airbags deploy at the same level as they should have based on the factory fitting? Second question could be, was it refitted by the manufacturers? All of those questions are there to preserve both our safety, ensure we survive, but also ensure we are not inconvenienced in the event that perhaps the car has had a significant engine issue and then you risk being stuck on the motorway, especially if you're doing long distances. Irrespective of all of that, we gather all the information and it helps us make a decision. Even when we buy the car, we go as far as getting insurance. The insurance is simply to say there are certain risks that I cannot bear myself despite all my initial research. And therefore I want to protect myself against the possibility of having to pay for things that I did not foresee. That's the reason people buy or sell insurance. Insurance is simply to cover a loss that you cannot afford to cover yourself, or perhaps in certain instances, if the insurance premium is too low and you think you're getting, for what you're getting in exchange for the money you pay, you're buying it at a discount, a significant discount, and therefore it's a net benefit. In any case, when buying a car, we do our due diligence, we part with our money carefully, and we get insurance. For some reason, relationships seems to be the one place that people do not pay much attention to the past of the person on the other side of the table. Now, bear in mind, I did not say dating. I said relationships. To make it very clear, there's a dating marketplace and there is a relationship marketplace. Whilst a woman's past in the dating marketplace should matter, recognizing that men are playing a short game in the dating marketplace and what they really want is simply sex, most men do not go through the process or do the due diligence. In any case, I don't pay too much attention to the dating marketplace in today's session. I'm speaking therefore with regards to relationships. In the relationship marketplace, the importance of someone's past is of significance and immense value. I'll use a different analogy. And this will be a short session because I think the analogies I'm using should trigger something in you that should cause you not to think emotionally and not to be emotive in your outburst, but to see the logical perspective of what I'm trying to get across. If you were looking to buy a house, here are some steps that take place. Firstly, assuming you're buying with a mortgage, and I'll use a mortgage primarily because there are more checks and balances through the process of a mortgage or loan purchase as opposed to buying with cash. When you're buying with cash, you're the equity owner, you're paying with your money, you should be responsible. As a matter of fact, for those who have cash, you should be a sophisticated investor. When you're buying with a loan or a mortgage, effectively you're borrowing the money. The house, technically on paper, is yours, but there is a lien placed on the house equivalent to the value of the loan you borrowed. So in technical speak, the first claim on the house belongs to the bondholder or the mortgage provider or the loan company or whoever may have loaned you the funds. The bank, using that as an example, will go through what we call a due diligence process. You find the house, you negotiate the amount, you make an offer, the offer is accepted. You go to the bank agrees to loan you money. Step one, the bank says, we have to send a surveyor, and the surveyor will have to be an independent surveyor, and we, the bank, will choose the surveyor, not you, because our money is at stake and we want to make sure that the funds we loan to you for the purchase is secure in the property itself. In other words, the value of the property exceeds the loan advance. They send a surveyor. The surveyor comes to the property. Now, I'm not speaking specifically about the type of survey, they vary, but in any case, someone comes and their responsibility is to validate that the value of the house, all things remaining equal, exceeds the loan advance. Now, typically speaking, the bank wants to ensure that there is a margin of safety, a buffer. So, for example, whilst they might give you a loan of, say, 95% loan to value, or they might, in some instances, want to give you something higher or even lower. The bank also wants to ensure that in the event, over the long term, depending on the duration of your loan, that their money is secure. They also do an analysis to make sure that you can pay them, even if, for whatever reason, the valuation is wrong. All they care about is that the principal can be repaid and the interests will be repaid over the duration of the loan, 20, 30, 40 years, whatever it might be. The process begins with a surveyor viewing the property, inspecting the property, coming back to the bank and saying, we think the property is worth X, and we think the loan advance is protected. Once that takes place, the bank moves to the next stage, which is to proceed with transferring the funds to the other side. Now, can you notice something? As part of the process of sending a surveyor, the bank is doing the same thing that you would be doing if you were buying a car. The bank is reviewing the property information. In this particular instance, one of the things the surveyor does, and here's a good part of it, another thing that occurs not on the bank side, but on your side, is you have to hire a solicitor. someone who's a legal representative, and their responsibility is to go back and dig through the past of that property. They're looking for liens, they're looking for monies owed, unpaid, they're looking for perhaps credits raised on that property. They're looking at several things: legal, anti-money laundering, anything that potentially could be a liability to you, the owner. They want to do the analysis first, research, and then collect all the findings, come back to you and say, we have found no issues and therefore you can proceed, or we have found some issues and here are the remedies. You see, in both instances and in both examples, with a car and a house, the past matters. Most people say that the most important decision we would make as young people come in two categories. Usually the person we choose as a life partner. And number two usually has to do with buying a house. When we buy a house, sometimes we go into a long-term debt, therefore it matters. When we, as men, when we choose a woman as a life partner, the reason it matters is partly because if things go wrong, which it will, it's Murphy's Law. Murphy's Law is ingrained into relationships and marriage. The odds are that 1 in 2, as a matter of fact, in 100% of the cases, the likelihood of divorce is guaranteed. 50% of marriages will end in divorce. In each instance, in the UK, 7 out of 10 times the woman files for divorce. The remaining 3 of 10, the woman asks the man to file because she wants to leave. So we aggregate, in 8.5 out of 10 times, she's filing for divorce. Therefore, the liability is borne by the man by virtue of the fact that if there is a family created, the custody goes to the woman. In 9 out of 10 times, she gets primary custody. He loses 50% of his net worth or assets. She gets the family home. And therefore, all of the liabilities, when you compound everything, including the fact that he has to pay child support and alimony or whatever it might be, is a bad deal. Therefore, making sure you vet properly is of primary importance. We make a mistake as men when we do not look towards a woman's past, usually to our peril, to our downside. So in today's session, the focus is to simply say, pay more attention to the past. In investing, most investment managers will make a note of to say, the prior performance does not guarantee future performance. They do that in such a way as to make you understand not to look to the past. They do that for their self-interest. However, we make mistakes as men when we do not look to the past. And it's important, if you're making a decision about taking a relationship from where it could be a casual stage to something serious, you need to look at her history. Of paramount importance is her sexual history. The reason that matters is simply because people seldom change. I understand the whole concept of born again virgins and people repenting and changing their prior ways and accepting the Lord and Saviour, turning to religion, renouncing their past lifestyles. I get all of that. And there is redemption through the right channels. And that is not what I am speaking about. I will tell you, irrespective of whether the person has chosen a new life, even if the person is Saul and now has become Paul, and on the road to Damascus has had a moment of awakening and enlightenment, and is saying, just like Paul, or just like Saul, in this particular instance, Paul, the things I used to love I now hate, and the things I used to hate I now love. Despite that, there was something still fascinating that happened with Paul. People were still very tentative when Saul had converted to Paul for the right reasons. Paul had a notorious past, and his past came back to haunt him. It took a long time for him to convince the early Christian church that he was now saved. Forgiveness comes from a higher authority. Understand, I'm not suggesting that you do not forgive a woman's past. Firstly, there is nothing to forgive on your part because it's not yours to forgive. Your responsibility is to be discerning and make sure you judge her based on her past. Not because she hasn't become a better person, but because usually her past performance is usually an indication to what the future results will be. I'm going to speak specifically, therefore, about her sexual history. The way we measure that is through what we call a body count. Body count simply refers to the number of sexual partners the person has had, the number of times the person has given themselves, both physically and emotionally and spiritually, to another person. Why does this matter? I'll say as follows. In the dating marketplace, a woman's body count doesn't really matter. As a matter of fact, the more bodies she has, the better for you if you're simply in the dating marketplace. Why? If she's stupid enough to give the one resource she has that gives her her highest value in the dating marketplace, if she's so trivial in giving it away freely, then I have nothing against you receiving it if given freely. So in the dating marketplace, a woman's body count doesn't really matter. Women talk about they don't want to be called sluts or hoes. Doesn't make any difference in the dating marketplace. Men, generally speaking, when in the dating marketplace, want you to be sluts and hoes because they want you to give freely as you've given other people, freely to them as well. Now, they make a mandate to themselves to make sure that they have protection because the likelihood or the correlation between possibility of sexually transmitted diseases and potential pregnancy is high, and that correlation is tied to a woman's promiscuity. In the dating marketplace, it doesn't matter. In the relationship marketplace, it does matter. Now, in today's session, and I have covered sessions in the past where I talk about body count and how to calculate it and how to discern. The issue is these days people lie. So you have to infer on what you think it might be. But you also have to infer based on other subtle bits of information you gather around. Now, let me speak specifically in this instance to why does body count really matter and her sexual history matter? Number one, if a man is looking to start a family, one of the things he's looking to do is make sure he chooses a partner. And in this instance, I'm not talking about from a business perspective. I'm saying a helpmeet, someone who he can bond with. The term pair bonding comes into the picture. The higher a woman's sexual indiscretions and the higher the number of people she's had sexual encounters with, the lower her ability to pair bond is inversely proportional. So if a woman has had multiple sexual partners, the likelihood that she can pair bond successfully for the long term with a man declines significantly. The number given is usually once a woman gets to about 10 partners and more, the number it becomes much harder. Now, obviously, there are exceptions to the rule, but this is what the data and science or the research suggests. The more sexual partners she has had, the lower the likelihood that she could pair bond. The second thing, from a sexual perspective, the ability to be fulfilled, to have an orgasm, declines. The more she has higher sexual partners. This is just something that is biologically true. The same principle happens with men also. So I don't want this to seem as though this is an attack on women. All of the things I'm sharing, if you invert it and replace the female with the male, you would find women can use the same solutions to ensure that they choose the right men. The ability to be satisfied in that relationship sexually declines the more sexual partners she has had. I won't go into the graphic details, but I hope you can understand that it matters. It really, really matters. So if you're a man who is has exerted sexual discipline, and you've got married to a woman who has not exerted sexual discipline over many years, and she's been around the block, we use the term a village bicycle, then the likelihood of you being able to satisfy her is much lower, which means the ability for you guys to satisfy each other is minimized by virtue of her past. Number 3, and I think this is important, sexually transmitted diseases, STDs. The more sexual partners you have, the more you increase the likelihood that you would actually, all things remaining equal, you could be a victim, or you might be unfortunate to become contract a sexually transmitted disease. So remember, there are sexually transmitted diseases that stay with you for life. I don't have to be graphic, but they exist. The likes of AIDS and HIV and even herpes. So, and this is perhaps a sad thing about dating and relationships. When we vet people, we do not vet people with so much rigor. We tend to go based on feelings. I do not know people who start dating and say, well, we need to do a blood test to make sure that you're clean, make sure that I am clean, and then make sure that both of us and neither of us are bringing into this relationship something that should not be there. We don't. We go based on feelings. Certainly when we're about to get married, we do not carry out such, you might say, intrusive tests. Now, the 4th has to do with pregnancy, the ability to reproduce. But this is also linked to STDs and in many ways linked to other illnesses such as cancer and more. There are certain sexually transmitted infections and diseases that we can contract, and they play a role in minimizing the likelihood and reducing the likelihood of success in pregnancy. These are not concepts men think about. A person might seem very healthy, but a sexual past, especially if they did not exhibit sexual discipline, and they did not vet or ensure that they had protection in all instances, the likelihood that possibly something may have gone wrong exists. And you coming into the relationship as a man, you're effectively inheriting the accrued mistakes of the past for which you intend to pay in perpetuity. But finally, the last number 4 is snapback. I use the example of a snapback of a rubber band. You pull something, you hold it, it stays in that position. And that's how I see people who say, I'm a born-again virgin, or I've changed my ways. They have expanded themselves and held onto that position. And providing that influence, which is the power holding them in that place, remains, whether that be church, or synagogue, or mosque, or any other form of influence. Providing that stays, perhaps sometimes it could be abstinence from alcohol or any form of addicted influence. Providing that hold back, that power remains, they will remain in that position. As soon as you let go of the rubber band, it snaps back to its original position. You see, the chains of habit are too light to be felt until they become too heavy to be broken. We become, by what we do repeatedly, who we are. The secret to our future is hidden in our daily routines. Our habits determine and control our lives. As a matter of fact, most people's lives are controlled by paradigms, which is simply a multitude of habits. Things we've done repeatedly become parts of our behavior, which become part of our lifestyle. And whilst we might abstain for a short while, the aroma of that lifestyle draws us back. So the biggest concern that I have normally for young men is, yes, you may have found someone who is now repented of their past and their ways, and they might speak in an eloquent and an elegant manner about how things are different. You might have observed them over 2-3 years, but that is not enough. And here is the reason. There was a time when women waited until post 18 to have sex. These days, young girls are having sex from about 11 or 12. By the time a woman turns 30, in the UK, the average age for marriage for most women is 35. By the time a woman turns 35, she has had, assuming she starts very early as 12, she would have had approximately 22 to 23 years of being sexually active. At the younger stages of her life, she might have multiple partners. By the time she gets to 30, 35, she could be looking at in 3 digits. That is a lot of people. Sometimes people are changing partners every month, sometimes more than once every month. And what you're finding is there's a habit that has been formed. Sometimes it has to do with where the person might be in their life. I'm not criticizing the person for going through difficult times. I'm simply saying the remedy they applied was the wrong one. And so what you tend to find is 22 years of doing something over and over again, and they meet you and they say, well, I haven't done any of such for the past 12 months, and you accept and you observe them for another year. What you have is 2 years versus 22 years of history. What you have, 22 years of lack of control versus 2 years of control. Now, if you understand how difficult it is to be self-disciplined, you will understand that the possibility of snapping back is much higher, and the probability that they will remain in that position where they exhibit discipline is much lower. So let me bring today's session to a close by simply saying, young men, you have to be wise. You really have to be wise. Part of the reason we had shame in communities was simply to encourage both young men and young women not to start that journey of self-discovery, especially the journey of self-discovery from a sexual perspective, because it was important to understand that what might be small decisions compounded over time become almost impossible to shift or to change. I would say to young men, pay a lot of attention to a woman's past, particularly her sexual history. The difficulty is most women will not tell you their sexual history, so you have to infer. This is where you need good judgment, a level of understanding, and a level of maturity. As a matter of fact, if you're emotionally involved with a woman, you shouldn't be carrying out or conducting the process of critiquing her sexual past alone. You need someone who is disconnected. Because if you were to ask, most people lie about their sexual past, and you might be deceived into thinking things are not as bad as they really are. In any case, go back and look at the session that I did regarding a woman's body count. I provide a formula. I'll leave the formula with you as I close. I provided a formula, and I have used this formula ever since. I think it might be of some value to you. Now, I recognize this is a formula from myself, and it may not necessarily be the right formula in this very promiscuous and sexualized day and age we live in, especially in the West. But it's there as a guide, as a reference. And let me say something to young women and those who have not started this sexual journey of exploration. If you find that you are within the tolerance I'm about to share, maintain that tolerance. In the short term, whilst it might seem as though you're not part of the fun and you're not enjoying yourself, you might stand out amongst your friends. In the long term, you will find happiness and peace and contentment, and you minimize the possibility and the probability of a divorce, heartache, disappointment, separation. The formula for sexual history, using the body count as a metric, is as follows. For a woman, a man assessing a woman's body count, what should you expect? You take her age, you subtract from her age the age of consent in the country she lives in. You get a number. That is the upper limit. You divide that number by 2. That is the lower limit. Between the upper limit and the lower limit, you have a range. That is the range of tolerance that her body count should be. Good example. A woman who is 22. Use the UK, for example. Functionally, we are adults at 18. 22 less 18 is 4 years. Some people might say, well, it depends on when you start counting. But to make matters easier, we'll give you 5 years, assuming you start counting as soon as she turns 18, if you're happy with that. So you have 18, you have 19, you have 20, you have 21, and you have 22, 5 years. The upper limit is 5. Divide 5 by 2 is 2, not 2.5. You can't have half a body count, so it's 2. We err on the side, we round down with body count, the lower limits, and we round up, or rather we round down with body count on the upper limit as well. So you have between 2 and 5. A girl who is 22. A girl who is 28. 28 less 18 is 10. Do the same example, it's 11. You divide by 2, is 5. So therefore she's between 5 and 10. Or rather 5 and 11. And think about what I've just said to you. In principle, what this means is that over a 10-year period of being an adult and the opportunity to be sexually active, she's only turned herself over or turned the relationship over once every year or once every 2 years. Which is not, when you think about the number, it makes sense, because at 18, most people tend to be in relationships for maybe 2 or 3 years. And they leave that relationship and they move into another one, and they're there for 2 or 3 years. So the first 5, 6 years of a woman's exposure to being an adult, she should have a very low body count. Because you're not out there whoring yourself away and giving yourself to everyone. You're preserving your chastity and purity and your value. So a woman who gets to 20, assuming she started at 18, but gets to 20 and has only had one sexual partner, and it's the same person she's dating, very easily can get to 25 and she's only had 1 or 2 partners. That is normal. These days, we tend to see women who are 20 and they have a body count in the double digits. That is not normal. That is abnormal. And part of the issue is that some of these girls have been having sex from a younger age, which also indicates the lack of sexual discipline, discretion, the lack of boundaries, possibly the lack of a role model in a masculine frame in her life, and therefore the inability of her to understand how to play with men, but not give herself to men. Now, I hope today's session has been useful.